My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses
by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds are geeks, entertainment culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power, nerds and geeks, come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and his team. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these podcast pals put it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic, multiverses, mega Christmas, strangest franchise. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope.
And then we disinfect it between uses.
Yeah, we got to get some of those sanitizing wipes. They seem to be hard to come by. BPR, are you perhaps like hoarding them? Maybe you have like a stash we can use.
There used to be, but then there's been a rule in the apartment since the quarantine began to wipe down everything that comes in from any shopping trip with them. So we still have enough, but they are definitely running low.
That's a pretty wise policy, but nonetheless, this past week was apparently National Superhero Day. I was woefully unprepared for this occasion, and I didn't know it was that until the day of. So I saw a picture passed around that day on social media. It was a picture of doctors walking through like the hallway of a hospital, and then you had DC heroes on one side of the hallway and Marvel heroes on the other side, kind of bowing and showing their respect for the healthcare workers. I think I shared that with you, Beef Pork Ribs. Did you see that picture?
I did. I also saw a much better Lord of the Rings meme with the part of the Return of the King where Aragorn turns to the Hobbit and says, "You bow to no one." And it was same concept, but I liked it better because I like Lord of the Rings more than superheroes. That's just me.
Well, there you go. So to all of our listeners who are healthcare workers, you are indeed the real superheroes right now, and that would include former co-host Dr. What, who everyone who listens to this show knows he's a doctor. So shout out to Dr. What and all of our healthcare worker friends. And speaking of our friends, we are joined again this week, once again, by Ben the Movie Buff.
Hey, how are you? Thank you for having me back. I'm really enjoying being able to chat with you guys, and it's nice to have something else to do, right? Because I don't know about you guys, but a lot of my days blend together where I'm either just watching movies, taking care of my son, spending time with my wife, or doing dishes or eating. Basically, it's one of those things. So it's nice to be able to have something a little different to do today. So great to be back.
Yeah, it's good to have you here, and perhaps just to retroactively celebrate National Superhero Day, let's all take a turn to mention who our favorite superhero is and why.
I was not ready for this. Much easier usually for me to go for supervillains than superheroes, but man, I think
You know what? I have an answer, so maybe I should.
yes.
That was cruel of me to just.
I was just filling the awkward silence. Go for it.
So my favorite superhero is Nightwing. Nightwing is Dick Grayson, and for people who don't know who that is, he was the very first character in DC Comics to be Robin, Batman's sidekick, and he graduated, if you will, to being Nightwing when he got too old to be Batman's sidekick anymore. And I like Nightwing because he's essentially all the things you like about Batman. He's a martial artist, he's a detective, and he seemingly knows how to take down any opponent. And he doesn't have superpowers, so he's like more human in that sense. But why I like him more than Batman is because he's more emotionally intelligent. He works better with other people. He's more of a leader than Batman ever was. He has received healing in his life for his childhood trauma that Bruce Wayne never has gotten. So he's just a more well-rounded character than Batman is. So Nightwing is my favorite.
Cool. I think in the past, when I've had to answer this question, I tend to be torn between Batman or Spider-Man. And with Avengers Endgame last year, like I'd have to include Captain America in the running. But I think, as usual, I tend to lean towards Spider-Man just because I think it's a really fun idea to have a teenager coming across these superpowers and having to fight um, all these different villains. Sometimes people that might be more, in some ways, experienced or more wise than he is, because from what I can tell, he tends to fight just people that are older. And I like the fact that I remember being a teenager, and I feel like during that time, because you're young, you're still trying to figure out your identity. You're trying to figure out who you are. And I feel like every normal teenager has to go through that, and it takes time to kind of, more or less kind of come to your conclusion of who you think you are and who you will try to be as you get older. But I find Peter Parker, of course, has a very interesting challenge because not only is he trying to figure out who he is as Peter Parker, but now that he's also Spider-Man, he has like the challenge has grown exponentially because he has I hate to say it, but with great power comes great responsibility. So because of that, it's such a big thing for him to have to go through. And I think it's really interesting to have that weight, have that burden be put upon a teenager as opposed to a character who's like in their 30s or 40s and then becoming a superhero. So Spider-Man's my pick for now.
I think I'll go with I'll go with the conventional answer and just give it to Batman for reasons of both influence in my life and better understanding and representation in media. Yeah, I've always had this problem not finding superheroes nearly as interesting as villains. Like if I think just of like my favorite Marvel characters, like the top three for sure are villains, and like favorite DC characters, it was getting pretty high up there too. So I'm gonna go with Batman though, just because he fights most of the cool villains and is cool by association. Also does have kind of I've always liked the kind of the kind of square that Superman, Batman, the Joker, and Lex Luthor create for the whole good versus evil and chaos versus law, which I think is just a fun thing to do. But overall, Batman just wins over Superman by quite a wide margin. So I'm gonna go with Batman.
And to continue this trend of celebrating National Superhero Day, we're going to play a little game together. People who are listening to this podcast have probably seen the memes that go around about, oh, you have kind of like drafting a team of sports stars or whatever. But in this case, I sent a picture to both Beef Pork Ribs and Ben the Movie Buff showing a list of 25 MCU characters. And the idea of this game is you have $15 and you have $15 to draft a team of heroes to defeat Thanos. And essentially, we have 5 characters who are valued at $1, 5 characters who are valued at $2, et cetera, going up all the way to $5. So we have some characters who are valued at $5 for themselves because they are so powerful, where we have ones that are valued at $1 because they're not so powerful. And so we're gonna play a little game here together. We're gonna play a little game here together to decide how we would draft our team. And Beef Pork Ribs asked the good question of, is this specifically MCU versions of the characters, or would they fight in the MCU Thanos? I think it's funner to just leave it to interpretation. So whoever wants to go first can offer up their team.
All right, then I will begin. I went so from the $5 tier, I took Doctor Strange for reasons of being the Sorcerer Supreme and knowledge that comes with that. I mean, he's he's kind of powerful. One might even say OP at time, and he's got a. It's not just that he's got a lot of power, but he also has kind of shown the responsibility he takes on, even though his adventures are usually kind of separated from some of the other members of the Avengers. just because he deals with the magic and mystical realm a little bit more. But still, he's got kind of that power with him, and also I think he's only one of two people on this list that is part of the Illuminati. So I got to give him that place. Did not go for the other member because I I don't like Tony Stark that much. Number two, I took Scarlet Witch, who for some reason at $4, who has literal reality altering powers, can create an entire different timeline. So yeah, I could have just picked her and then just spent it on a meme team for the rest of it because let's be honest, she's actually the most powerful person on this list that we were given. But again, that's if you take Scarlet Witch from the X Men from the comics at her most powerful. But we were told we could use comics, so as such, my next choice is Vision, who is in the $1 tier for some reason. I mean, he was created by Ultron and shares a lot of similar powers to him, and I mean, Ultron could beat Thanos, so let's take Vision. Then I decided to go for the last three as utility picks. So Nebula in the $2 tiers because she's got intimate knowledge of Thanos. Loki for fast travel because he does have access to that as an Asgardian, and in some continuity as the ruler of the Frost Giants. And then uh, Star Lord's for some giggles, but also for transport capabilities in space.
I question some of those choices. I'm not sure a lot of those people would work together. Like you're trying to get Loki and Nebula and Doctor Strange to all work with each other. That might not work too well. And who knows if Doctor Strange and Scarlet Witch's powers would work in tandem or if they'd work against each other. But I'm not the one drafting your team. That's just my kind of hot take there.
They've got Star Lord to hold them together. He is the glue. He is the heart. Plus, as I said, Scarlet Witch can beat him alone or Vision, so the rest of them don't really matter.
All right, so I'll take this as my cue to talk about my lineup. So I think for me, when I was looking at this lineup, my thought was uh, I wanted to try and pick a team that would A, hopefully work together well, but also B, um, they would also have different attributes, right? So I'd want to try and pick certain superheroes for different reasons in hopes that they can all kind of complement each other and do a good job of taking Thanos down. So for me, in the $5 row, I'd have to pick Captain America. I think he's a skilled fighter. He's also a good leader. From what we see in a lot of the Avengers movies, he definitely seems to be the one to try and rally everyone together and have everyone go in a direction where they can defeat the bad guys. I also think Thor is pretty cool, and I love a particular moment in Infinity War where Thor joins the battle. That's all I'll say. I think he's really powerful, so I'd love to have him there because he's the god of thunder. In the $4 row, I would pick Ant-Man, and my thought for this is because we don't get to see what Ant-Man could have done in Infinity War because there's other things going on with Ant-Man, but I feel like it would help to have Ant-Man because he can go really small and he can also get really big into to Giant Man. And I think it'd be fun to try and see my group take out Thanos, and if they fail, just have Giant Man with his foot up, just waiting for Thanos to be by himself, and then bring his foot down to try and squish Thanos. I doubt it would be that simple, but I think it'd be fun to see him try. And then for my last one, I agree with BPR about Vision that, yeah, it's kind of funny that he's in the $1 row because I feel like he's way more powerful than that. So I want someone who can fly. I want someone who's a really great warrior and has the laser beam shooting out of his head and is also able to fly and kind of keep a distance and find a good time to come and strike Thanos. So that's my lineup. I want like one part leadership, one part size, one part flight capabilities, and Thor kind of flies, but I think he's also just a really good warrior, as we've seen time and time again.
Also, like the tier list as I see it in this picture makes sense. Like Vision is really the only one that doesn't make sense even within the MCU itself. Like even in the MCU, Vision deserves to be higher up than that with having an Infinity Stone in him being able to fly, the lasers. He can wield Mjolnir, like that alone should put him at least in the $3 tier. So sort of strange.
For myself, I had to have Spider-Man in there because like I just can't do something without Spider-Man involved. I mean, his power set is very versatile, and with the web shooters and everything, he can like do some distance-based stuff, and he is he is quite fun. So he would, he'd be like that kind of like motivational support for other people. I put Black Panther in there because the way I see it is like you got to have a rich guy who can afford fancy technology. So you have Black Panther in there. Their advanced Wakanda technology would help them essentially create resources to fight Thanos with, give everyone some vibranium weapons. And, T'Challa is a leader. So certainly I would pick him as the leader of my group of Avengers. And they're both worth $4, so that put me at 8. And then I thought it'd be good for diversity of knowledge base and skill set. I put Gamora in there, and I put her in there because like she's a good fighter. She knows how to use weapons. She has information about Thanos, and the diversity of knowledge bases certainly is helpful. And that's sort of why also I picked Wong. He's basically like the cheap version of Doctor Strange. Wong's only worth 2 points, whereas Doctor Strange is worth 5. But to me, I'm like, it seems like Wong can do most of the things Doctor Strange can do. He can do all the portals and do all the magic spells and everything. So, in terms of having someone with like the knowledge base of the magic, again, in the MCU, maybe it's a much worse scenario in the comics where maybe there's a much larger gap in their abilities in the comics. But from what I can see in the movies, Wong seems to be pretty capable. So he's a good buy to have. He's worth $2. And then my final $2, I went for Wasp because I'm like, Hope in the MCU anyway is a lot smarter than Scott. So having someone with the size manipulation ability seems to be helpful. She's also a scientist, so she could work well with T'Challa and even Peter Parker to like create some fancy technology that maybe shrinks and is vibranium, and like that's how they defeat Thanos. Wouldn't that be great if it was actually something like that? So yeah, my team has 5 people in it: Spider-Man, Black Panther, Gamora, Hope, aka the Wasp, and Wong. And I like to think that this group of people would actually work well together. I think Gamora would probably need a little bit of convincing to work with others, especially if it's the Gamora from like the end of Endgame. But otherwise, yeah, that's my team. You guys have any critiques?
I think that's a solid lineup. I think yeah, that would be fun having a few characters together that are into science and scientists. So yeah, no, I think you made some good arguments. That's a solid lineup.
I think generally we all made some good lineups based on kind of what our standards were. Um, because also this is like MCU Avengers. If we were talking about like the Avengers as a group as a whole, there'd definitely be I think a lot of different options that I would take over the ones that were presented. But as far as MCU Avengers go, that was some pretty good lineups. I guess I thought less about teamwork than everybody else, but I mean the writers will fudge it so that they work together. Let's be honest.
And of course, this is all characters of fiction. There's no right or wrong answer here, but perhaps everyone at home has their own idea of what's the right answer. So there we go. That was fun. We're going to move right on into our topic for today. We haven't really addressed this very much in the Batch Hour podcast. We've kind of made references to it in so fact as how it affects our recording. But for the last 2 months now, really, the world has been impacted by a global pandemic related to a novel coronavirus, which was identified at the end of 2019, which is, and apparently it's that's why it's called COVID-19, coronavirus 19. So yeah, the whole world has been impacted by this virus. There is no cure for it. It's spreadable by people being in contact with each other. It at this point has been affecting every country in the world. I am not a scientist. I'm not going to pretend like I know what I'm talking about. But the coronavirus, COVID-19, the whole situation has impacted all of life on the planet. Like human activity has been impacted. When all this was going down, we were kind of doing our memory lane mini series, and we weren't really thinking about how the virus and how the pandemic was impacting nerd and geek culture. I honestly was not even, it wasn't even crossing my mind because looking I was not watching movies at the time. It was just sort of out of my headspace. And it wasn't until after I finished Exodus 90 that I started to like look into the news and see what was going on in the world, and realizing that a lot of things were impacted, including things that related to nerd and geek culture. And so our conversation for today is actually going to be talking about how this pandemic has impacted nerd and geek culture. Practically, you're probably going to hear a lot of the same stuff because one of the biggest responses to COVID-19 is that all public gatherings of, in right now in Ontario, you can't be a group of more than 5 people together. So any kind of event that was scheduled that brought together people has been either canceled or deferred. Any project that involved any business that involved people gathering together has been shut down until an undetermined date. So you're going to hear us hear a lot of, oh, it's been delayed, oh, it's been canceled. But we're going to try and be creative in the midst of that and kind of bring up different elements of how the different kind of sectors of nerd and geek culture are reacting to the pandemic and how they're impacted by the pandemic. And podcasting is a great place to start because as we've mentioned for, gosh, it's been over a month now, the Batch podcast has been recording online using a platform called Zencastr. And Zencastr is a service that allows individuals to record a podcast over the internet. And normally, you actually have to pay for Zencastr as a service. Like, it's a company, and this is their product that they put out for people to purchase. Pretty much from the start of the pandemic, they have made their service available to podcasters for free. They put out a message to everyone saying, we acknowledge that at this time people can't get together physically, so we want to make it easier for you to continue putting out content at no cost. And so we have benefited greatly from that because we're an amateur podcast. We're not professionals. We don't have a big budget for our show. So being able to record a somewhat decent quality podcast over the internet without having to pay for it is a great benefit to us, and it has allowed us as a podcast to continue producing episodes every single week. So we want to give a big thank you to Zencastr for offering their service to us and other podcasters free of charge. And if you're a person out there who wants to start a podcast, I would recommend using Zencastr, at least for the recording. We've given them kind of verbal recognition in all of our episode descriptions, but this is our first time actually throwing Zencastr a bone. So thank you very much for allowing that for us.
Yes, thank you. This has been really cool. I didn't know about this until Average Joe told me a week or so ago. So this has been a really great tool for us to use in this time. So thank you, Zencastr.
Yeah, especially going forward for the podcast in particular, if I'm to continue being the co-host potentially from another province, it's a useful service to have. But also, it's a great thing that they've done, for I guess the podcast community. I don't know exactly if that's this. I'd go as far as calling us part of that, but I guess we kind of are. But yeah, generally, but just for people at large to have something to do and to listen to, and also a way to connect. It's really great for them. Good on Zencastr.
And so, for our conversation talking about how the pandemic has impacted nerd and geek culture, we're just gonna go through some different, I guess you would call them sectors of nerd and geek culture. So most of these you'd be familiar with from our Memory Lane series, Beef Pork Ribs, but I threw in at least one extra one here. So we'll start with video games and gaming in general. From what I can tell, obviously because shopping facilities, stores are ordered to be closed right now, there probably isn't a whole lot of physical sale of video games going on right now. But I would presume that digital sales of video games have increased.
I mean, just generally speaking, there aren't that many physical sales. Like I think we did talk about it in the memory lane. People aren't buying video games, physical copies of video games anymore. But at the same time, I know that definitely for myself, I started playing a game I hadn't played in like almost 3 years. But a lot of people just started, instead of picking up an old game, have started buying new games. And as per usual, Steam jumped on the opportunity to put out a big sale. I'm not saying that Steam exploits the situation or anything like that, but there have been some games, some very popular games, gone on big sale and starting to sell really well. So definitely, game sales are up, and even like I know some like I have some friends who did end up buying digital copies of games they used to have physical copies of. Kind of for the same reason I started playing my game. It was for mostly for nostalgia's sake, and they were like, "Yeah, this game I used to have, but it's not available anymore, and I lost my physical copy, so I bought an online copy of it." I think also happened a lot. Um, so it's been probably pretty profitable, but at the same time, a little bit scary because, you know, other than independent video game designers that sometimes, kind of just work on their own and they do exist, a lot of like the companies are probably having a very hard time, you know, keeping their development going because especially bigger games have teams of like hundreds of people working together for games, and now that's really uh, kind of taking a hit and going on the back burner, I suppose.
Yeah, I was looking at an article from the New York Times that basically said a lot of major video games that were in development at the time of the shutdown have been delayed because while people could work from home, I would imagine the sophisticated computers you need to work on these video games probably you can't just take them all home with you. And I'm guessing there's also a high level of collaboration between developers, so it's probably a lot harder to do that remotely. I do have at least one friend who actually has bought a Nintendo Switch since the pandemic started because they saw that, hey, you know what? There's going to be more opportunity to do things like play video games. And so they're playing Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild for the first time during the pandemic. So it's like, hey, that's a great way to, start playing video games.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't go on Steam that often. I do have a Steam account, but yeah, it wouldn't surprise me that a place like Steam would probably have more traffic because people would be getting their games digitally. Although I do recall, and I wouldn't be surprised if the store is closed now, but I think when the new Animal Crossing game came out, I think either at the end of March or early April or whatnot, someone I saw on social media had posted that there was actually a lineup at one of the game stores, whether it be EB Games or GameStop or something like that, where people still lined up with social distancing in mind, obviously, and they would let a few people in the store at a time to get their copies of the Animal Crossing game, purchase it, and then leave. I'm not sure if the new Animal Crossing game can be purchased digitally because I don't have a Switch, but I know that some people earlier during the lockdown did brave the store so that they could go and get a physical copy.
And the article from the New York Times also noted that from the fourth quarter of 2019 to the first quarter of 2020, Twitch exceeded 3 billion hours watched for the first time.
Wow, that's a lot of screen time. Which I mean, like, yeah, that's kind of crazy. But now's the time, right? Now's the time to be watching stuff. So wow.
Well,
Apparently, ESPN is now showing esports as well.
there are a few like I do follow a few streamers like on you. I watch their Twitch highlights on YouTube, and yeah, it's been an interesting time for them because they've been able to do to justify doing longer hours as well, and they're like part of the few people. But it's weird because they are still taking a hit because people are being more wary about spending money, so some subscriptions started descending even though more people are watching it, less people are like doing paid subscriptions, which has been an interesting thing. And I know like um my fiance is on TikTok, and one of her friends literally did a live feed of him washing his dog and had something like at like total, I think it was a few hundred people had at some point come in to listen to that live of just him washing his dog. So you cannot underestimate how bored people are at this you know at this time, which I think a mixture of great, but also as Ben pointed out, kind of concerning that there is that much. screen time being done. Um, but I mean, on the subject of video games, I know a lot of people who have actually like started picking up speed running. Apparently, there's a lot more people who are just now have the time to invest into like one specific video games and learning how to speed run them. Apparently, the speed running community is going pretty crazy at this time. So it's it's not all bad news and things shutting down. There are also some things that are evolving or getting better. Whether they're completely healthy or not is subject to debate, but still.
Yeah, and this really poses questions to like the future of video games because all of the events and the conventions and the platforms for like announcing and hyping up new games are canceled. They're not happening. So we're really going to rely on, I guess, social media and digital news content to like get up to date about what's happening with games. The article also mentions here that it's delays for even games that are supposed to coming out in the fall are most likely inevitable. And they make an exception there. They say maybe games that release annually, like Call of Duty or Madden Football, those ones might continue because it is essentially just an updating of previous games. So I'm not a huge gamer, so like to be honest, it doesn't really matter to me if all these video games get delayed in their release. I think it's just kind of a necessary thing to do right now, and I guess of course it's unfortunate for those whose livelihood depends on the video game business, but like the option to buy them online and play them online is available. And yeah, there is of course the concern that has been highlighted here about spending too much time on screens, which we'll talk more about in a moment here. Before I move on, any final thoughts about video games?
I just quickly like commenting on what you said about ESPN now playing more esports. It's true that it's basically the only sport that can still be played despite the social distancing because you don't need to have people. It's not in the same venues. It's not played in the same way as it was, and that is kind of messing with some of the players, and it's different, but it kind of it's I think it's a good thing for kind of esport recognition that yeah they're still providing a service that others can't necessarily provide.
All right, moving on to comic books. And I can assume that everything I'm saying about comic books is probably applicable to physical media as well, like books or magazines or newspapers. But for the first time in 51 years, San Diego's Comic Con has been canceled. The big Comic Con International that draws hundreds of thousands of people to San Diego every year, where movie studios kind of like highlight their upcoming films and TV shows highlight up or TV shows, yeah, TV networks promote their upcoming shows. That isn't happening this year, and of course, it makes sense. I've heard people who have gone to this convention say they get sick after experiencing it on a healthy year. So of course, keeping you can't have that many people together right now. But it does pose an interesting question because that is kind of like a focusing event for pop culture. A lot of things that's where a lot of hype gets built about things that are happening in the next year. So and because everything has been delayed, who knows what will happen.
I think one of the things that I just wanted to point out, I don't know if this is necessarily super relevant, but I don't think that mangas have cut off yet. I don't know if that's just the situation in Japan or the fact that they tend to be less of a big team, but or maybe it just hasn't happened yet because they had a couple chapters. I don't know. But on the subject of Comic Con, I think it's the thing about it is that it's kind of a snowball effect for what we're looking at coming out of, social isolation. There's going to be obviously an economic turn down, and I think that that just kind of is inevitable. It's one of the inevitable things, but a big event like that does actually cause a certain amount of problems, especially I'm thinking less of like larger companies that have to, produce that can hype up their games because that they can still do online. They can still afford to run ads on YouTube more or other, on Twitch, which is now getting more views. Like there's different ways, but it's especially bad for kind of indie game developers as well as or lower budget things that can take advantage of such a big event to kind of be present and catch maybe some people as they're coming in, as well as I was just thinking of like the last Comic Con I was at, local vendors that, you know, they sell very specific geeky things, and yes, they can sell them online, but like talking to them, this is like, events like Comic Con are the big bulk of the money that they actually make out of this, and if they lose that, it's a pretty large part of their livelihood that is leaving. So it's kind of sad, but also I suppose it's kind of on us to look at that and maybe try to find out who that local artist you saw at your last con was, and look them up and find them on social media to see if they're still being able to distribute their art or whatever their merchandise is, because probably a lot of people are making that change from selling physically to trying to sell online.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think and I know to some of the Comic Cons and Pop Expos that I've gone to here in Ottawa that I think there are a lot of people that have booths where they sell comic books, where they sell artwork, where they sell memorabilia, all sorts of stuff. And with this not happening, like yeah, like it's such a gigantic change, and so many people are going to be missing out in so many different ways. And I was trying to think about the fact that I know recently, because of everything that's happened, is that people have had to try and adapt technologically to try and make or in other ways to try and make their businesses work during this time with social distancing in mind. And I was thinking about that idea that like, oh, how cool would that be if they did like a digital like a watch party, a live streaming of Comic Con, of certain portions of Comic Con, but I guess it makes it kind of difficult when so many things have been delayed and been pushed back, that it's hard to now, in some ways, promote certain things and show new trailers when we're not even sure whether some of these movies are going to be coming out soon, or like for other things as well, whether it be TV shows or comic books. So it's kind of difficult because it is such a huge thing that's part of nerd and geek culture that's been going on for so long, and this will be the first year where it just doesn't happen.
One piece of news I found very interesting is that apparently right now in North America there's only one distributor of comic books, like physical comic books. It's called the Diamond Comics Distributors. So basically every comic book publisher sends their like comic books to these people, and they're the ones who distribute them to the comic book stores. And for the first time in over 80 years, Diamond Comics Distributors ceased shipping of comic books in late March of 2020. They said, we're not sending out any more comic books. So even if comic book stores were open right now, they wouldn't have any new material to sell because Diamond has made the decision to halt on shipping for for the reasons related to the pandemic. So it's surprising to hear that not the recession, not the Great Depression, not World War II, none of these like world-changing events that have happened in the past. Apparently, not even for 9/11 did they halt the distribution of comic books. It's now only with COVID-19 that we've actually seen that impact. And so that the comic book print industry, I should say, like the actual like buying paper comic books, that has been on a decline over the years anyway, as more and more people have gotten into print or digital comics, I should say. So, it begs the question if actually the print industry for comic books will actually like come back after this, because people might just get so used to, but reading their comics on Comixology or on their iPad that they don't need print comics anymore. And to my sadness, Free Comic Book Day. It's always the first Saturday in May. It's obviously been canceled for this year. They say it's going to be officially, their website says it's delayed until later in the summer, but realistically, it's probably not going to happen. So, but BPR, it's good that you mentioned that manga is still being sold as it would be in Japan. I I don't know how much longer they plan on. I have seen like several different individual manga series have announced like a hiatus, but I guess the actual like publishers and distributors for the manga haven't stopped selling them yet.
I could be slightly wrong about that. I'm just speaking from not having noticed any like major changes, but it also might just be because we're a little bit behind what's actually being like published and done in Japan. So that's also a possibility.
All right, so moving on now to TV. For people who again are not too familiar with how the TV schedule works in North America, the season generally goes from September to May. So shows will start airing in late September, early October. They'll take a hiatus over Christmas, and then they'll be done with their finales usually by May. And then there's certain shows that might start in January, or certain shows that might start in June and go over the summer. But that's generally kind of like the TV season. So that means most TV shows that are ongoing start filming their new season in like July. And they're usually done filming their show by late March, at the latest early April. So most primetime TV shows were actually getting towards the end of their filming for the year when the pandemic started. And, by March 15th, most businesses were being asked to, social distancing was put in place. So most people who were like working on a TV crew couldn't actually go to work because on any given day on a TV set, there's at least, more than 50 people. If you include all the crew and the caterers and the cast and all the people. So I know specifically for The Flash, I was listening to an interview with the star Grant Gustin, who plays the Flash, and he was saying that when the coronavirus shutdown happened, they had 3 episodes they had yet to film for the season, and because of the shutdown, there's no way they're actually going to finish the show this year, and so whatever the last episode was they filmed is now going to be the season finale for the year. And I kind of skimmed through a list of TV shows, and basically every North American TV show has either ceased production or they're just gonna have to they're ending their seasons where they were when the shutdown happened. So it'll be a very anticlimactic season for television for most shows because they will not have reached the intended ending point when you run out of episodes to watch. And this also has a huge impact on next year's TV season as well, because there's, of course, the question of like, well, when do these shows get to go back to filming? Because, again, they can't do that until the shutdown's over. But it's actually really hurting the TV season right now because this is generally what we call pilot season, when new TV shows are having their pilots filmed to be picked up by networks. And so without the pilot season happening right now, where they're filming these pilots to go to series, that means that come the fall, there won't be any new shows because they won't have filmed anything. And so it's at the very earliest, we should be looking at like new TV shows coming on, I don't know, next January.
Yeah, so it's funny you bring that up, Average Joe, because I think all of this timing was a big contributing factor, right? As you mentioned with The Flash, by the time they got shut down, they still had 3 episodes to do, but they just didn't have enough time to shoot those episodes. So, it's just like that decision's made for them. But what's interesting is that with streaming platforms like Netflix, uh, I think with them, because like sometimes in a given month you'll have these new TV shows coming out, and you'll have like, oh, a new series here, a new series there, or a new season, and I think we will get some new television over the summer from Netflix, from what I can tell, just because I've already seen a few trailers of shows that were probably filmed 4 or 5 months ago and have been in post production ever since. And from what I can tell, just because I do work on film and television productions, not so much in the post production side of things, but definitely with filming. But from what I can tell with post production, you don't have as many people working together. So whether it be having less people than usual or having people set up from home, I think with some productions, not many, but with a few, they were able to continue working on certain shows or movies. Hence, that's why we're still seeing like Netflix movies kind of coming out here and there, because if they were able to get, if they had some sort of foresight with like, oh, things are going to get worse, let's plan for the worst so that we can continue working while things are going on, they're still able to get some of these projects out. But obviously, as you say, with primetime TV shows, yeah, so many of them are still going to be it'll be interesting to see what happens during this time because of what's going on.
Yeah, we have the Summer Olympics were supposed to be happening in Tokyo this summer. They've been deferred until next summer, July 2021. The WWE World Wrestling Entertainment is like the one sporting thing that's still going on. They've they film their events now with no audience. And I've heard people comment on how silly it is because so much of that kind of wrestling is based on the crowd and how the wrestlers engage with the crowd, and when they're just going yeah yeah to like an empty stadium, it's kind of almost comical in that sense. But all major sports leagues are shut down for the year. A lot of them keep promising that they're not season isn't canceled, but it's on pause. But at this point, unless we're going to be playing hockey in the summer, maybe that will be what happens. I don't know.
I think that kind of highlights the general consensus for this, which in nerd and geek culture as much as in every other domain, is that we're not sure what we're going to do, and it's going to be strange, but right now this is what we're doing. And I think hopefully, if as we get into the next couple of months, there will start to be more and more of a plan for the return rather than just the constant cancellation. I found that that's at least in some parts of the world, like what is starting to happen is that people are less and less talking about what's been canceled and more is trying to focus on what's coming back. Um, we're looking even just in Canada. There's certain provinces are starting to announce, their plans for, what might be a return to normalcy eventually, and that's, something to look forward to. So I think even though this episode is mostly going to be talking about things that got canceled, things that are being pushed back, and speculating about when it may or may not come back, you have to still remember that these people, this is their livelihood. So obviously they're going to push to return as soon as possible. So let's stay hopeful as well. Like while we're looking at this and think about keeping an eye open for the new rollout. You're talking about how usually this is a season for pilots. Well, they may just get deferred to another time, and it might still be you know kind of the same uh, sorry the same procedure just at a different time. And I think maybe kind of like the Olympics, there might be a decision to keep going every 4 years, starting with 2021, and we'll have Olympic on odd years instead of just the even ones, or we'll have to look at whether it's going to be decided that we just forget about these things and do them, just continue doing them normally, other than what's coming in the near future.
Yeah, totally. And one thing I'm excited about is one article I read kind of suggested they compared this current situation with TV to the American writers' strike that happened in 2007 and 2008. So there was like half a TV season where there was no new content because writers were on strike. And one of the things that apparently happened during that strike is they essentially imported more content from other countries, so like shows from Canada and other parts of the world to air on TV because they needed to fill their time slots with something. So this could be a great chance for good old Canadian shows to invade the United States, or better yet, more anime to be on TV in the States because they need content. So, and speaking of anime, we're just going to go straight into anime itself. Again, it's kind of a lot of the same stuff with TV. A lot of shows that were scheduled to start airing have been delayed, and some shows that had started airing only have so many episodes completed. So anime works on a seasonal schedule where basically every January, April, July, and October there's new shows coming out. So any shows that were supposed to come out in July this year have been delayed until later. Shows that started airing in April really only have about 3 or 4 episodes of content available, and then after that they're on production hiatus. And then any shows that were being simuldubbed, meaning that they were having a English dub produced while it was airing in Japan, were delayed as well. The one cool thing to highlight here is that Funimation in the last 2 weeks have actually been able to produce home dubs. They've actually been able to put out new episodes of their shows they would normally be doing English dubs for by having all their actors record their dialogue from their homes. And I have yet to actually listen to one of these episodes to see what it sounds like. But even the fact that it took them several weeks, but even the fact that they were able to coordinate an initiative like that is, in my opinion, quite incredible.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing because I saw that you put that One Piece and Pokemon are off the air, and maybe not so much for the anime, but like One Piece manga ran almost nonstop for something ridiculous. Like I can't remember exactly what it was, but I think the only time it went on hiatus at the time of the tsunami in Japan, it was the first time that it had gone on a non-scheduled hiatus. So, when One Piece is off the air, there's something crazy going on in the world.
Yeah, the article I read noted that with both One Piece and Pokemon, the anime versions have more or less been on the air consistently since they started in the late '90s, and so for them to cease production is like a huge thing. But then not just them, but basically every anime that was airing and every anime that's scheduled to air in the summer is essentially off the schedule as well. So again, people work in these industries, people can't gather in their workplaces to work on these products, so therefore they're not able to work. Events like Anime Expo that promote upcoming materials are not happening. So again, a lot of the same things. But talking about movies, just in general, again, the same kind of logic of anything that was currently being filmed has stopped filming. Everything that was scheduled to begin filming will not start filming. And every movie that was scheduled to be released has had their release date shifted. So that whole episode, Beef Pork Ribs and I did in January, kind of talking about all the movies that were coming out this year, is essentially null and void now because a lot of those films have had their release dates shifted to 2021 or beyond. And some films that were scheduled to come out have shifted. They have chosen to have their film released over streaming instead of going to theaters. So the sequel to Trolls, essentially, they were kind of like the pioneer of this. They chose to open it up to the world digitally, and you could rent it for like $20. And from what I understand to date, it's actually grossed about $100 million from people renting it.
Yeah, so this whole development about the fact that, I mean, if anything, people might be watching more movies now that we're all stuck at home, but the whole idea of digital streaming, and these home premieres of Trolls and Invisible Man and The Hunt gets really interesting because for someone like me, going to the movie theater is such a, and this might be a strong word, but a sacred experience for me, right? Like I love going to the movies, I love getting popcorn, I love sitting down and hoping that the silver screen will kind of transport me and take me away from the world I live in to some magical place, or maybe something that kind of is a mirror of the world that I live in, and will hopefully change me for the better by the time that the movie is done. And don't get me wrong, I love watching movies at home as well, but there has been a lot of talk about what is going to happen to movie theaters after things, after the restrictions loosen up somewhat, right? Whether it be before a vaccine comes out or afterwards. And it's interesting how a lot of people have already said so far in some surveys that have been done that there are a fair amount of people that do not want to go back to the movie theaters once restrictions have lifted, and they might be more likely to go back to the theater when a vaccine is available, but that is when a vaccine is available. So it'll be very interesting to see how movie theaters are affected by this once things hopefully get a little better.
I think, I mean, as a Catholic, I'm looking at this almost like the same way that people are talking about, mass. They're getting used to like streaming mass and having it online. Will they really go back to it once it's available? I mean, obviously, in the case of the physical cinema industry, like theaters, they were already kind of somewhat on the decline due to digital media, but now it's kind of gotten to a point where, yeah, there is a real question whether people will go back. I know that personally, I tended not to go see movies as much, given that when I was younger, we had a projector at home, so going to the theater wasn't as exciting for me. But I do know a lot of people who still have somewhat that kind of excitement. But now that it's not only the only thing available, but you start realizing potentially that it is a lot cheaper to watch them and stream them from home. I wonder if people are going to like what the actual effects are going to be uh, on theaters, especially again if something like Trolls made money, and now people are thinking, the cinema companies are thinking, or not the cinema, but the film companies are thinking, well, if we can do this release without having to bother with all the press and doing it online, especially with companies like Disney having their own streaming service, it may end up just being, if it ends up being more economically feasible for them, we're going to hit a real problem for theaters.
Yeah, so I think I was watching a video last night where someone made a fair point where they said how the bigger movie theaters and the chains of movie theaters will probably be fine because they really thrive on those big blockbuster movies to come out and make a lot of money. And I think for me, I'm kind of concerned more so about the smaller theaters, the one that play maybe smaller movies. Like there are two I can think of close to where I live that I don't go to that often, but I do like having the option of going there when maybe there's a foreign film or an Oscar contender or just like an obscure art house movie that I do want to go out and support. And they were mentioning how back in the 90s, I can't remember the exact numbers, but there was something like there are about 7,000 theaters across the United States, right? And then in the last year or so, they did a they did another list of how many theaters there were, and there were about 5,000. So many of these smaller theaters had been closed down, and they think that um, with something like this happening, that if anything, it's just kind of speeding up the process about how theaters will be changed and how there will probably be less of them, but the bigger ones will probably stay open because they still need bigger budget movies to come along and rake in the billions of dollars here and there.
And we're already starting to see some of the fallout from this shift to streaming because Universal Pictures, after this success with Trolls, announced that they were going to explore in the future more of releasing films straight away to digital. And there's a movie theater chain in the States called AMC. And in response to that announcement by Universal, AMC made an announcement saying that they would no longer show Universal Pictures films in their theaters. Essentially, their way of saying, you're not, if you're going to screw us, we're going to screw you, which seems ridiculous because, like, while Universal isn't the biggest movie studio out there, they do have some films like Fast and the Furious that have a huge audience base. And to say, yeah, we're not going to show any of your films in our theaters, you're going to be coming back to a hurting industry anyway, and now you're just making it harder for yourselves.
I think especially that quickly to I mean, I don't know exactly how much time happened between those two announcements, but it doesn't seem like there would have been enough time for it to be, a well thought out process. It seems like it's almost like a visceral reaction, which never is a good idea.
And so, just to provide some course correction from our previous episode, we're going to briefly discuss all the films that are still coming out this year. The first movie that has a release date that has yet to be changed is the Pixar movie Soul, which has its release date of June 19th, which has been unchanged as of the writing of this article I'm looking at from just over almost 2 weeks ago, but perhaps Soul's date has changed. June 19th. I think they could easily do what they did with Onward here, where they decide to, put it on digital for like 2 weeks and then put it on Disney Plus. I can't imagine it being that expensive a film to have made, so they could easily make their money back online. But Tenet, the new Christopher Nolan movie, coming out July 17th, that seems to be like the first like big budget movie that has. It's like the one movie that aside from Soul has not had its release date changed yet. I guess I've heard rumors that Christopher Nolan's fighting really hard for the movie to still come out in July when it's set for. But I mean, I can't validate that because it's a rumor. And then from July 24th on, we have new release dates for movies that were delayed. So, first of all, July 24th, we have Mulan. That's currently scheduled to go out. That was supposed to come out at the end of March. Can we just get a verification if we're still getting back cookies or noogies for these things? I still give Wonder Woman a big, or not Wonder Woman, other Wonder Woman, Mulan. Mulan still gets a back cookie for me. Tenet, I don't really know enough about it yet. It still seems kind of weird. So to me, it's kind of I don't know how to feel about it.
So just to clarify, I did actually check my phone quickly because I thought I saw some news about Soul being pushed. Soul did get pushed from its June release to a November release.
Also, to get back to kind of address what you did ask, I still am very unsure about the Mulan movie. They're on the razor's edge for what they can and can't do with it, and I feel like I've been pretty vocal about disliking all the live action remakes they've done so far. I don't think that will be any real exception, but I am, open to being proven wrong.
So we have Wonder Woman 1984, which is coming out August 14th. I'm still really excited about it. I know Beef Pork Ribs isn't. Ben the Movie Buff, are you excited for Wonder Woman to come out?
Kind of. I mean, from what I saw in the trailer a few months ago, I'll see it at some point. I don't know if I'll be rushing to the theater, like whenever that may be, to go see it. But yeah, I kind of have like a mild interest in checking it out.
Beef Pork Ribs, you'll be happy to know that Bill and Ted Face the Music, the movie you named as your most anticipated for the year, its release date of August 21st has yet to be changed.
That is good news. Although I'm not sure I would necessarily. I'll have to think about that one because I mean, if movie theaters are open and I can go see it, I probably will. Uh, I mean, I recently watched Point Break and just good old vintage Keanu Reeves. I know he's not the same anymore, but it doesn't matter. It's still great entertainment. So I am still looking forward to that. Yeah.
The Kingsman, the stupid Kingsman prequel, is still set to come out September 18th. I think maybe with some of these movies like this, they're just like, it's not going to do well regardless, so who cares if it gets released during the pandemic or not?
Gives them an excuse to not do well at the box office.
This is for Ben the Movie Buff. The sequel to the new Halloween is still scheduled to come out October 16th.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see whether that sticks or not. I liked the Halloween 2018, um, and yeah, I feel like I just need to see a trailer whenever that comes out for the new one. But once again, I have a mild interest in checking it out.
Black Widow is now coming out on November 6th. I wasn't super excited for it anyway, but it's an MCU movie, so there's part of me that's like, I guess I still got to see these things. So yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. The new Bond movie, No Time to Die, I think its release date has now been moved to 2021 as well. Here it says it's coming out at the end of November, but pretty sure I saw somewhere that it's actually been deferred later.
That's unfortunate. It means Daniel Craig gets to keep being James Bond for longer.
Kong vs. Godzilla is still coming out November 20th. Raya and the Last Dragon still coming out November 25th.
I forgot they were doing Kong versus Godzilla. I'm still not sure how well that's going to work out for them, given, well, especially because I suppose Invisible Man was going to be part of that whole cinematic universe, which is now being delayed or deferred. So, we'll
Now there's different cinematic universes here. There's the Kaiju one, which is Kong and Godzilla, and then there's the Universal Movie Monsters one, which keeps restarting because they keep making bad movies.
I thought they were the same. I thought that would be a lot more interesting to me if they were the same, but oh well.
Yeah, I'm curious about. Once again, I have a mild interest in Kong versus Godzilla, just because when Godzilla Skull Island came out about 3 years ago, it did fairly well financially, all things considered. And then Godzilla King of the Monsters came out, which to me just seemed like it would do just as well as Kong Skull Island, if not better, bringing back some of these old Godzilla monsters. And it seems like it did well overseas, but it didn't do as well here in North America. So I'm kind of curious, like, are people still going to flock to the theater to go see this movie? But of course, that's a question I would ask before all of this happened. And with this happening, I just, yeah, I can't help but wonder if, I mean, obviously it's going to hurt it to a certain extent, but yeah, like it's definitely a showdown. I'm curious of checking out whenever that may be.
Free Guy, that video game movie with Ryan Reynolds, is now coming out on December 11th.
Still looks like a good Ryan Reynolds movie where Ryan Reynolds is doing Ryan Reynolds things.
The December 18th grudge match we talked about before between the remake of West Side Story, coming number 2 America, and Dune. At the time of this article's writing, they're all still coming out on December 18th. But then the wrench in the whole thing now is that Top Gun Maverick is now coming out on December 23rd. So it's almost like a four-way race for the Christmas box office money.
I think it'll be very interesting to see what the Christmas box office money looks like, because depending where we're at, I feel like it's either going to be like everybody's going to be trying to kind of fix up the economy by spending more around Christmas and being able to have that, or it's going to still be kind of stingy and not mean nearly as much as it usually did, which might, perhaps mean another delay. I think that'll be interesting to look at. And I mean, personally, I obviously think that Dune is going to be a disaster regardless of when it comes out, but that's just me.
I think what's kind of interesting about that lineup. So just remind me again: Dune, Top Gun Maverick. What are the other ones?
The remake, or not the remake, the sequel to coming to it's coming to America. So there's the number two instead of the word two. So it's a sequel to Coming to America with Eddie Murphy.
Oh, right, and then West Side Story. Yeah, so that's interesting because I know in past years around Christmas, some of the big box office movies tend to be the ones that are either like a sequel or a remake or a spin-off, like they're based off of something else. So we a lot of people might already have some knowledge about that, and all four of those movies are either sequels or yeah, sequels or remakes. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see whether movies of that caliber can get the audience out around that time, assuming that people have kind of warmed up again to the movie going experience. Because I know for sure for me, it's I place my hope in Steven Spielberg that he can do a good West Side Story remake because I watched the original last year in the fall and was blown away by it again. So yeah, here's hoping they can all stay in their release date zone.
But I think you've both highlighted the question of, well, will people go back to the movies? Not maybe for the theater, but even just the are people going to be willing to like go outside and go into a public place like a movie theater? Like how long will it take for people to feel comfortable in that kind of space again? Like that's a question we can only speculate to the answer for right now, and we'll obviously know when these movies come out, if they come out, and how their box office does. We'll know what kind of response we're going to get. And it's kind of sad because yeah, it's a much smaller slate of films that are going to be released this year. But when you're not, releasing anything till late July, August, what do you expect? But among these, I would say the only two movies that I would definitely like make sure I go to the theaters to see would be Wonder Woman 1984 and Raya and the Last Dragon.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing for me is that I will because obviously when things get back to some sort of normal, I will definitely want to be going back to the movie theaters again. But I think I've gone enough times to various theaters to know when certain showings will either be sold out or when there will be more people there. For example, I find if I go to a showing before noon, that automatically cuts out a whole bunch of people because not that many people want to get up early enough to go see a movie at like 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. So I'd probably either be going earlier in the morning or I'd be waiting for the movie to be out for 2 or 3 weeks and seeing it at an off time, that's not 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. That'll be my tactic at least.
I mentioned like a larger interest in watching Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures, but also it's kind of a strange thing though, because we do talk about certain things going back to normal, but movie theaters are pretty much probably going to be some of the last thing, because it's a lot of people in a cramped environment. And it's I feel like it probably, when we're talking about when they'll come back, Ben just said he'll try to go on an off thing. It'll be interesting to see if people do kind of go to like opening night performances, or if it is really going to be a lot more of maybe smaller, reopening smaller rooms, or maybe even, having certain seats emptied so that you can maintain physical distancing and whatnot. I think it'll be just an interesting time just to see if, when it does come back, whether people are capable or willing to go to the like at the quote unquote right time, or if a lot of people will be trying to wait for it to have passed and might end up being kind of a double fake out, and the first week will be the best time to go watch it. I don't know.
And Ben, the movie buff, of all these films that are still scheduled to come out this year, do you have one you're most excited for that you'll definitely be in the theater to see?
That's a tough one. For me, it's between Tenet and A Quiet Place 2. It's funny. I remember telling my wife in early March, saying like I want to go to the theaters to see Onward, Mulan, and A Quiet Place 2. And we got to see Onward about a month after we had talked about that, a month and a half. But yeah, Quiet Place 2 is one that I'm definitely really excited for. I hope it's really good. And then Tenet, I've been a Christopher Nolan fan basically since Batman Begins. So it's those two that I would definitely brave a theater trip for. And it's interesting, BPR, how you mention, like, when movie theaters open, like, will they, like, how will people go to see them? Because even thinking about my idea of like, oh, I'll go earlier in the morning when there won't be a lot of people going, there might be 50 other people that have the same idea that I do. So it'll be interesting to see what it's like to go at times that are usually off times, but other people might have the same idea about trying to go at different times in hopes to not be with as many people. So we'll see how that works.
And with that, I think that is a good way to kind of bring our conversation to a close. If you want, we want to like speak conclusively about this, is we're acknowledging that a lot of jobs are going to be impacted by are being impacted by the pandemic. Of course, a lot of businesses like movie theaters, game shops, comic book stores, production companies for movies and TV, artists who rely on selling their product at conventions. Yeah, like a lot of things are impacted by this pandemic, but like pretty much every aspect of the economy is impacted by the pandemic. So, and there's more. I hate to say it more. No, I don't hate to say it. It's the truth. There are more essential services that are more important than our nerd and geek culture that have also been delayed and stopped. So it's kind of like, as fans, we're gonna have to really just enter into this time the best we can. We did our whole Memory Lane series talking about all this stuff that had been made in the last decade, and we're very fortunate. We live in a time when there has been so much content put out there that it's impossible for one person to consume it all. And so we actually, even if there is a year-long delay before we get new content, movies, TV, comics, whatever, we have all kinds of stuff we can dive into, and we have online platforms where we can engage with other people and discuss it. So I think we just have to enter into this the best we can, and then when business is allowed to open again, like, show our support.
Absolutely. What's funny is in the last year or so, I had this thought because there are so many old movies I want to see and so many new movies that I want to see. I thought to myself, if I could freeze time, for a while, I could catch up on all these old movies and not have to worry about any new movies coming out. And what's strange is that when this happened, I thought about that and I was like, wow, in a way, I kind of got my wish, but I didn't think it would be like this. So it is very strange. But as you mentioned, Average Joe, there are so many movies and TV shows out there to watch that I don't think we'll be running out of content anytime soon. So it'll be great to catch up on that before we get some new stuff, whenever that may be.
And I think the thing that Average Joe kind of highlighted, and which I would give as kind of a closing remark, is to remind people that, yeah, there are a lot of jobs that are at stake here and that will not be able to return to their normal state unless we, as consumers, help them, whenever that may be. Um, so to, you know, even though we are all going through difficult times together, the best way to kind of get out of it once it's over won't be to do everything you want to do all at once, but to be able to participate in those events as they come out and to restart in a more normal way to support them. And but with, I think, an added amount of intentionality at the beginning to make sure that we are remembering that, some of those people that went through a hard time went through unemployment, that we need to be able to help them if we want this to continue going on. If you want to reach the show, you can send us an email at
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
Message us on Facebook or message us on Twitter at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
You can find the Bat Jar Podcast in whatever platform you listen to podcasts, including YouTube. Please give us a rating, write reviews for our shows, and share our posts on social media. This will help us to bring all people inside the Bat Jar.
So normally we would go into the Bat Jar and find out what we're going to talk about next week. But there is still one nerdy, geeky movie that came out while Memory Lane was going on that we have yet to talk about. And I've been putting it off partially because I know Mjolnir is working on a wig to wear to watch it with beef pork ribs, but also because I heard it wasn't that good. I'm, of course, referring to Birds of Prey and the fantabulous emancipation of one Harley Quinn. Yeah, so we gotta talk about that movie. And luckily I have seen points, and I've learned that Cineplex, the Canadian movie theater chain, is letting you use scene points to rent movies. So that means I can actually watch this without having to pay for it, which I'm making assumptions before I watch it, but based on how I currently feel about it, I'll probably be grateful that I didn't have to pay to see it.
Yeah, I think we will have to talk about it. I'll figure out how I'll be looking at it, but I guess yeah, we'll talk about Birds of Prey and how well it may. I may personally just focus on the comics to have a more reasoned approach to it and to why it might have happened the way it did.
And fun fact, Birds of Prey was the last movie I saw in theaters before I started work on the last movie that I worked on, where obviously I worked for 6 days and then we got shut down because of everything going on. So, yeah, that was the last movie I saw in theaters before all this happened. Good old Birds of Prey.
I appreciate how you're reserving judgment to keep us in suspense. So come back to the Batshar podcast next week when we talk about the Birds of Prey movie. And until that time, I'm Average Joe.
On beef pork ribs.
And then the movie buff.
Catch you on the flip side.
Disinfect your microphones after use.
See you in the next one.